Hannah Darcy's shoes clicked against the polished hardwood floor of the dining room as she carried a heavy tray of empty wine glasses back to the kitchen station. She was 30 years old, worked 3 different jobs just to afford her small studio apartment, and her lower back felt like it was full of broken glass after standing for 6 hours straight. The restaurant was located in the middle of downtown San Francisco, a place where wealthy executives and the city's hidden vampire aristocracy spent more on a single dinner than Hannah earned in an entire month. She glanced at her reflection in the shiny silver coffee pot, noticing the dark circles under her eyes and her brown hair slipping out of its neat bun. Her co-worker, Leo, rushed past her with a plate of $40 appetizers, whispering that Table 9 needed water refills immediately. Hannah sighed, grabbed the heavy glass pitcher, and tried to ignore the constant low-level panic that came with having exactly $43 left in her bank account and rent due in 9 days. The entire atmosphere of the restaurant changed in a single second when the front doors opened. It was not a physical sound, but rather a sudden drop in temperature and a heavy silence that swept across the dining room. Conversations died down to quiet whispers, and the 2 hostesses at the front stand stood perfectly rigid. Arthur, the floor manager, sprinted toward the kitchen entrance with a face the color of old paper, his hands shaking so violently he could barely straighten his silk tie. He grabbed Hannah's arm and told her to stay completely away from the dining room because Table 17 had just been taken. Hannah asked what was going on, but Arthur just stared at her with wide eyes and said the owner had arrived unexpected. He did not give any details before running into the back office like he was trying to escape a fire, leaving the rest of the staff frozen in place. Hannah looked toward the corner window where Table 17 was located and saw a man sitting alone in the dim light. He looked to be in his mid-30s, wearing a dark, tailored suit that looked incredibly expensive, but his most striking features were his snow-white hair and his completely pale skin. He was Dominic Frost, the vampire king who headed the Frost Syndicate, the multi-billion-dollar corporation that owned this establishment and dozens of others across the state. The human staff knew him as a ruthless billionaire, but the supernatural community knew him as the ruler who controlled the city's nightlife with absolute authority. He sat with a strange, perfect stillness that made everyone in the room nervous, not looking at the menu or his phone, just watching the room with cold gray eyes. Chloe, one of the senior waitresses, turned around and walked directly into the storage closet to hide, while another server pretended her computer system had completely crashed. Leo was standing at the wait station, aggressively polishing a wine glass that was already spotless, his jaw tight as he watched the corner table. Hannah walked over and asked why everyone was acting like a bomb was about to explode in the middle of the room. Leo looked around to make sure nobody was listening and whispered that Dominic Frost fired 3 managers in the Austin location last month, before lunch even started. He explained that the king shut down an entire hotel lounge in Denver because someone used the wrong brand of olive oil in his salad. Leo told her the man was a dangerous figure who destroyed lives for fun, and that nobody wanted to take the table because a single mistake meant losing your career. Hannah looked back at the white-haired man, who had not moved an inch, his long fingers folded neatly on top of the white tablecloth. She told Leo that he was just a person who wanted dinner, and she was too tired and too broke to care about corporate fear. She grabbed a leather menu and a clean water glass, ignoring Leo's warnings as she began the long walk toward Table 17. Every eye in the restaurant followed her movements, and the kitchen staff crowded around the service window to watch her walk toward the most dangerous customer in the city. The background music seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of her own steady footsteps on the floor. Hannah reached the table, stopped beside the white-haired man, and put on her best professional smile, despite her exhaustion. She introduced herself, told him she would be taking care of him tonight, and waited for him to acknowledge her presence. Dominic Frost slowly raised his head, his dark gray eyes locking onto her face with a focus that made her skin prickle with heat. It was the look of someone who noticed every detail, every hesitation, and every hidden thought. Dominic spoke in a quiet, controlled voice, that carried a strange weight, ordering a ribeye steak cooked medium rare with no side dishes. He specified that he wanted a glass of water with absolutely no ice, his pale fingers tapping once against the table. Hannah nodded, keeping her hand perfectly steady as she poured the water from her pitcher into his glass. She asked if he wanted to hear the evening specials, but he simply said no without looking away from her face. Hannah told him to take his time with the menu and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her before she could take a single step. He told her she was new here, stating it as a fact rather than a question, and asked if she knew who he was. Hannah turned back, met his cold gaze, and replied that she knew he was a customer who wanted to eat dinner. A flicker of something that looked like surprise crossed Dominic's pale face, though his expression remained mostly unreadable. He studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them until Hannah felt like she was standing under a giant microscope. He told her to bring him the steak, and then ordered her to tell Arthur that he wanted to speak with him before the food arrived from the kitchen. Hannah nodded, confirmed the order, and walked away toward the kitchen before he could say anything else. Her heart was beating fast, not because she was terrified, but because the interaction had been incredibly intense. The white-haired man radiated power, the way asphalt radiates heat on a summer afternoon, every word measured, and every movement perfectly deliberate. Arthur was waiting for her the exact moment she stepped through the kitchen doors, his face covered in a thin layer of sweat. He demanded to know what the king had said, looking like he might throw up his lunch right on the floor. Hannah told him about the ribeye steak, and added that Dominic wanted to see him immediately at the table. Arthur let out a small groan, straightened his jacket with trembling hands, and practically sprinted out to the dining room to apologize for the delay. Hannah placed the order into the computer system and went back to her other responsibilities, refilling drinks for a couple at table 9 and printing separate checks for a group of business executives at table 12. She tried to focus on her regular tasks, but she could see Arthur standing near table 17, bowing his head repeatedly while Dominic spoke to him without moving. 20 minutes later, the kitchen line cook handed Hannah the plate with the ribeye steak, and she carried it out to the corner table. Dominic Frost was sitting in the exact same position as before, looking like he had been frozen in time, while the rest of the world moved around him. She set the plate down carefully, announced the steak, and asked if there was anything else she could provide for his meal. Instead of answering, Dominic gestured to the empty chair directly across from him and told her to sit down. Hannah blinked in surprise, reminding him that she was currently working her shift and had other tables to take care of in her section. Dominic looked up, his pale face sharp in the candlelight, and repeated the command in a quiet voice that left absolutely no room for argument. Hannah pulled out the heavy wooden chair and sat down, folding her hands neatly in her lap, while trying to ignore the frantic gestures Arthur was making from the wait station. She looked closely at Dominic Frost and realized that up close, he looked incredibly worn down, with dark shadows under his cold gray eyes that his pale skin could not hide. He cut into his steak with surgical precision, took a small bite, and then set his fork down before asking how many years she had spent working in the service industry. Hannah replied that she had been a server for 12 years across 4 different cities, always showing up on time and doing her job without complaints. Dominic asked what made her different from the rest of the employees who were currently hiding in the kitchen out of pure terror. Hannah met his gaze directly and said that fear did not help her pay rent or serve food. And since he was a hungry customer, her only job was to make sure his meal was correct. Dominic leaned back in his chair, a faint trace of amusement touching the corner of his lips as he studied her honest expression. He noted that Arthur had told him she was studying business management online during her late-night hours, which he claimed seemed like a massive waste of time for a 30-year-old making minimum wage. The comment stung, but Hannah kept her voice level as she explained that she wanted to understand how businesses worked so she could build something of her own someday. Dominic told her that he did not come to the restaurant for the quality of the food, which he noted was actually overcooked, but rather to observe how his employees behaved when they thought nobody important was watching. He admitted that the results were terrible, because everyone was so busy protecting themselves from mistakes that they had forgotten how to do their jobs properly. Hannah pointed out that his reputation for firing people without warning was the exact reason everyone was terrified to approach his table. Dominic fell silent for a moment, his gaze shifting to the window as he watched the city lights blink in the darkness. He unexpectedly revealed that he had a 7-year-old daughter named Lily, who was smart and completely fearless. But lately, she had been asking why he was always angry. He explained that his wife had died 4 years ago in a sudden car accident, leaving him to run a multi-billion-dollar syndicate while trying to raise a 3-year-old child who did not understand why her mother was never coming home. To cope with the grief, he had poured all his energy into controlling every single variable in his business, becoming a cold machine that everyone feared. Until Lily drew a picture of their family the previous week that only included herself and her nanny. The honesty of his words surprised Hannah, and she realized the powerful vampire king was carrying a weight he did not know how to put down. She told him that Lily did not need a perfect father who controlled everything, but rather a dad who simply showed up for her even when he was tired or made mistakes. Dominic looked at her, really looking past her waitress uniform, and asked if she believed she was worth someone's time. Hannah admitted that most days she was not entirely sure, but she knew what it felt like to be a child, wondering if she mattered to her parents. She stood up, stating that she needed to get back to her other tables before Arthur had a complete nervous breakdown. Dominic thanked her for the conversation, and Hannah walked away feeling as though she had just survived a strange storm. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of standard restaurant work, and Dominic paid his bill in cash before leaving without speaking to another soul. The moment his sleek black car pulled away from the curb, the entire restaurant let out a massive breath of relief, and Arthur immediately began asking Hannah what they had discussed. She kept her answers vague, saying they only talked about her college classes and his dinner order, but the tension remained high. 3 days later, Hannah arrived for her evening shift, only to find Dominic Frost sitting at table 17 once again, wearing the same dark tailored suit. Arthur looked like he might actually cry this time, and Leo muttered that the king was back to find a reason to shut the entire location down. Hannah grabbed the water pitcher, walked over to the corner table, and poured his water without ice, before asking if he wanted the same steak. Dominic looked up, his white hair catching the dim light, and ordered the salmon instead, specifying that Hannah should tell the chef the meal was for him personally. He explained that he wanted to see if the kitchen changed the quality of the cooking when they knew the owner was eating the food. Hannah told him that felt like a deliberate setup, but she took the order to the kitchen anyway, where the head chef personally prepared the fish with extreme care. Dominic ate the salmon without making a single comment, paid his bill, and left another generous cash tip before disappearing into the night. He returned the next night, and the night after that, until table 17 officially belonged to him every single evening. By the end of the second week, Hannah had become the only server in the restaurant brave enough to talk to him like a normal human being. Their nightly conversations grew longer and covered real topics rather than just food orders and corporate metrics. He asked about her marketing exams, and she asked about Lily's favorite books, openly criticizing him when he admitted he worked too late to read bedtime stories. Hannah told him that leaving the office early was a simple choice he was refusing to make because he was using work to avoid his empty house. Dominic's jaw tightened at her blunt words, and he warned her that she was overstepping her boundaries as an employee. Hannah did not back down, stating that he had asked for her honesty, and she was not going to lie to him just because he owned the building. She sat down across from him without asking for permission, pointing out that they were both lonely people trying to survive in completely different worlds that felt exactly the same. Leo warned her after the 5th visit that she was playing with a dangerous fire, insisting that billionaires and vampire lords did not just chat with waitresses without an alternative motive. He believed Dominic was building a legal case to fire her, but Hannah noticed that the king never actually got angry when she made minor mistakes during service. When she forgot his water one evening, he simply asked for it politely, and when she accidentally interrupted a phone call, he merely held up a finger to finish his sentence. He was demanding and precise, but he was never cruel to her, and she could feel a strange connection growing between them. Neither of them noticed Arthur watching them from the kitchen window, his phone held tightly in his hand as he typed a long email to corporate headquarters about inappropriate behavior. The mandatory corporate email arrived on a Tuesday morning while Hannah was still asleep after working a grueling double shift. She woke up at noon, checked her phone, and found a calendar notification for a mandatory meeting at the Frost Syndicate headquarters at 3 o'clock that afternoon. The sender was Arthur, who had been avoiding eye contact with her for the last 3 days, while whispering to the other servers. Hannah immediately called the restaurant, and Leo answered the phone, his voice dropping to a low whisper as he heard her name. He told her that nobody ever got summoned to the 14th floor of the corporate tower unless they were about to be fired or sued. Leo said he heard Arthur talking to human resources about workplace dynamics, and warned her not to sign any documents without reading them first. 3 hours later, Hannah stood outside the massive glass and steel skyscraper in the financial district, wearing her only professional outfit. The lobby was a terrifying expanse of white marble, security guards and silent elevators that moved so smoothly she could not feel the ascent. When the doors opened on the 14th floor, a receptionist in a tailored suit immediately guided her down a long hallway lined with glass offices. Everyone she passed looked perfectly polished and important, making Hannah feel entirely out of place in her cheap black skirt and white blouse. She was led into a massive conference room with a sprawling view of San Francisco and told to wait until someone arrived. The door opened minutes later, and a sharp woman in her 50s walked in, introducing herself as Diana, the Vice President of Human Resources. Diana sat across from Hannah, opened a thick leather folder, and began asking precise questions about her interactions with Dominic Frost over the past 2 weeks. She asked if the king had ever made her feel uncomfortable, or if he had crossed any professional boundaries during their nightly conversations. Hannah answered firmly that nothing inappropriate had happened, explaining that she was simply serving a customer who preferred her section because she treated him normally. Diana noted that Hannah called the owner by his first name and that he called her Amelia, which suggested a level of familiarity that concerned the executive leadership. Hannah lost her patience, leaning forward to ask why the company was so terrified of 2 human beings having a normal conversation about life. Before Diana could respond, the heavy conference room doors swung open, and Dominic Frost walked in, followed by 2 executives named Victor and Owen. Dominic looked completely different from the tired man who sat at table 17. He wore a flawless charcoal suit, his white hair was styled perfectly, and he radiated a cold authority. He walked straight to the head of the table, placed his hands in his pockets, and told Hannah that he appreciated her coming to the headquarters. Victor, the chief operating officer, immediately opened his laptop and stated they were here to discuss serious concerns regarding workplace conduct and fraternization. He claimed that multiple reports had been filed about Hannah spending excessive time at the king's table instead of managing her regular duties. Hannah looked directly at Dominic, whose face was a mask of corporate neutrality, and asked if they had brought her here just to fire her. Dominic leaned back in his chair, remained silent for a long moment, and then asked Victor how many times he had visited the downtown restaurant recently. He turned to the executives and asked them to explain why every single employee in that location turned pale and ran away whenever he walked through the front doors. Dominic stood up, walked to the glass window looking out at the city, and stated that the company's internal metrics were completely broken. He revealed that while profit margins were up 12%, employee satisfaction had hit an all-time low, and employee turnover had reached 40% across all locations. He turned around, his cold gray eyes locking onto Victor, and stated that fear was driving the entire corporation into the ground, because managers were lying to protect themselves. Dominic explained that Hannah was the only employee in the entire state who treated him like a human being instead of a threat, which was the only reason he kept returning. Victor tried to argue that Hannah was just a waitress who lacked corporate experience, but Dominic interrupted him, stating that she possessed the exact perspective the leadership was missing. He revealed that he had been conducting a secret audit of the restaurant division for the past 2 weeks, using his nightly visits to see what occurred when the staff thought nobody important was watching. Dominic pulled a thick document from his jacket, tossed it onto the table, and announced that Arthur had been systematically cutting staff hours below safe levels to increase his own bonuses. Furthermore, the report proved that Arthur had been stealing 20% of the server's credit card tips for the past 2 years, pocketing over $30,000. Hannah gasped in shock, realizing why her paychecks had always felt light, while Diana went entirely pale at the mention of the financial theft. Dominic stated that the individual violations were a symptom of a toxic culture that rewarded bad behavior as long as the profit numbers looked acceptable. He told the room that he was not interested in simply firing people, but rather in understanding why good workers felt they had to cheat to survive. He looked back at Hannah and announced that he was creating a brand new position called the Director of Cultural Integration and Mortal Advocacy, reporting directly to the CEO. He explained that the role would have the full authority to investigate employee complaints, audit management practices, and hold executives accountable for toxic behavior. Dominic looked her in the eyes and offered her the job permanently, stating that he needed someone in the building who was not afraid of his white hair or his power. Victor looked like he was about to choke on his coffee, and Owen began shaking his head in absolute disbelief at the announcement. Dominic offered a starting salary of $90,000, plus full benefits, telling Hannah she had 24 hours to give him an answer. Hannah left the corporate tower in a complete daze. The bus ride back to her small apartment, feeling entirely surreal as she stared at the floor. $90,000 was more money than she could even comprehend, enough to pay off her mounting debts and finally stop working 3 different jobs just to survive. Yet, she knew that accepting the position meant walking directly into a corporate war zone where every executive would view her as a dangerous threat. She called the restaurant the next morning at 9 o'clock, and Dominic's personal assistant put her through to the King's line without a single moment of delay. Hannah told Dominic she would take the job, but only if he agreed to 3 strict conditions that she required in writing before signing the contract. Her first condition was that the company provide her with real comprehensive training in human resource law and conflict resolution so she could do the job effectively. Her second condition was that she receive absolute written protection from executive retaliation, meaning she could never be demoted or fired without Dominic's direct personal approval. Her third condition was completely personal. She demanded that Dominic leave the corporate office early enough to attend Lily's school events and read her bedtime stories. She told him that he could not build a healthy company culture while destroying his relationship with his own child, forcing him to fix both aspects of his life. Dominic was silent for so long she thought the call had disconnected, but he finally agreed, telling her to report to the 14th floor on Monday morning. By Friday afternoon, the downtown restaurant was in complete chaos after security guards walked Arthur out of the building on Thursday morning following the theft investigation. Leo told Hannah that the head chef had quit out of fear, and Chloe had been transferred to another location while corporate investigators interviewed the remaining staff. Hannah felt a twinge of guilt for leaving her co-workers in the middle of the fire, but she knew the system could not heal without removing the corruption first. She arrived at the glass tower on Monday morning, wearing a new black suit she purchased with her final restaurant paycheck, her hands sweating as she found her small office. Rebecca, the VP of HR, walked in carrying 2 cups of sugary coffee and offered her an unofficial orientation about the corporate landscape. Rebecca warned her that half the executives believed Dominic was having a total breakdown, while the other half assumed Hannah had used inappropriate means to secure the position. She explained that the board of directors thought the king had lost his mind and was actively looking for a legal way to remove him from power. Rebecca stated that she had worked for the syndicate for 8 years, and was tired of watching the culture strangle its employees for short-term profit metrics. She offered to stand in Hannah's corner, providing her with full access to internal records, which Hannah immediately used to begin her first major project. Hannah spent the next 2 weeks conducting intensive exit interviews with the 47 employees who had quit the company over the previous 6 months. She scheduled an in-person meeting with a former server named Maria Lopez at a quiet coffee shop to learn why she had walked away after 6 years. Maria revealed that Arthur had forced staff to work illegal closing shifts until 2 o'clock in the morning, with only 2 people to clean the entire location. She explained that she filed 3 separate reports with Human Resources about the stolen tips, but the corporate office completely ignored her, because Arthur's revenue numbers were always high. Hannah took 15 pages of detailed notes during the interview, realizing that the company's standard incentive system actively encouraged managers to exploit human workers. She conducted 8 more interviews over the week, discovering the exact same patterns of retaliation, schedule manipulation, and corporate neglect across multiple locations. When she presented her preliminary report to Dominic, his jaw tightened as he read the documentation of the damage his management style had caused over the years. He revealed that the senior board members were already questioning his judgment regarding her new position and would fight any major restructuring plans he proposed. Hannah told him not to ask for the board's permission, pointing out that operational decisions were within his rights as CEO, according to the corporate bylaws. She urged him to use his authority to clean house immediately, stating that Lily should not grow up watching her father back down from doing the right thing. Dominic looked at her for a long moment before nodding his head, telling her to compile a final list of the toxic managers so they could begin terminations. The corporate backlash began on Thursday afternoon when Lawrence, the oldest and most traditional vampire on the board of directors, called an emergency meeting on the 16th floor. Dominic walked into the grand boardroom with absolute confidence, instructing Hannah to sit next to him with her laptop open to present her data. 8 board members sat around the massive dark wood table, their expressions cold and hostile as they looked at the human waitress who had disrupted their operations. Lawrence did not waste any time, stating that the board was deeply concerned about the sudden termination of 9 profitable managers across 6 major locations. He claimed that Dominic was blowing up a functioning system based on personal feelings rather than sound business judgment, creating instability that worried major shareholders. Hannah stood up, refusing to be intimidated by the cold gazes of the wealthy aristocrats, and projected her laptop screen onto the wall for everyone to see. She revealed that the company had spent $1.2 million the previous year alone on recruitment and training costs to replace the employees who quit. She explained that her conservative financial projections showed the company would break even on the restructuring within 18 months, saving $800,000 annually after that. Lawrence dismissed her math as speculative nonsense, stating that a waitress with a laptop had no right to dictate corporate policy to a multi-billion-dollar syndicate. Hannah fired back, stating that the qualified executives were the ones who built this broken system, and that shareholder value was directly connected to employee well-being. A board member named Beatrice leaned forward, looking closely at the retention data, and pointed out that the numbers supported Hannah's argument about the high cost of fear. She proposed a compromise, suggesting the board grant Dominic a 6-month trial period to fully implement his cultural reform program across a few select locations. Lawrence fought the proposal bitterly, warning that prioritizing human feelings over financial discipline would tank the stock price and destroy their market dominance. However, when the formal vote was called, 5 hands went up in favor of Beatrice's motion, giving Dominic the operational authority he needed to continue. Lawrence glared at Dominic, stating that this war was far from over and that he would be watching the metrics closely for any signs of failure. The next 2 weeks were incredibly brutal, as Hannah worked 14-hour days coordinating with Rebecca to implement the new employee advocacy policies. The executive team became openly hostile, with Victor refusing to attend her weekly strategy meetings and Owen copying the board on every single email to build a paper trail against her. Hannah ignored the passive-aggressive behavior and focused entirely on the downtown restaurant, which she was using as her primary test case for the new culture model. She hired new managers who understood empathy, established an anonymous complaint system that went directly to her office, and ensured fair scheduling for the human staff. Within the first month, employee turnover at the location dropped significantly, and customer satisfaction scores began to climb higher than ever before. Dominic visited the restaurant on a random Tuesday evening, sitting alone at table 17 while Leo served him a salmon dinner without any signs of nervousness. Hannah joined him after her office hours ended, and Dominic revealed that he had successfully left the corporate tower at 5 o'clock the previous Friday to attend Lily's school play. He laughed softly, admitting he had panicked in the parking lot because he did not know what to wear to a second-grade theatrical production about recycling. He thanked Hannah for forcing him to show up for his daughter, stating that Lily had been much happier since he started coming home for dinner. Their peaceful moment was interrupted when Hannah received an urgent phone call from a new manager at the Oakland location, revealing that Victor was actively sabotaging their work. Hannah walked into Victor's corner office the following morning without knocking, slamming a printed email onto his polished glass desk while he was reviewing financial spreadsheets. The email proved that Victor had secretly contacted 3 different location managers, telling them that the new anonymous employee complaint system was completely optional. Victor looked up with a cold smile, stating that he was simply providing operational context to experienced managers who understood the reality of the business better than a former waitress. Hannah told him that his actions were a direct act of insubordination and that she was taking the documentation straight to the CEO's office. Victor stood up, his professional mask dropping as he stepped close to her, his voice dripping with pure contempt. He told her that she did not belong in the corporate tower, and that Dominic was simply blinded by whatever strange relationship was occurring between them at night. He predicted that the board of directors would remove both of them within the next 3 months, returning the syndicate to the traditional ways of running things through absolute control. Hannah did not blink, telling him that there was nothing between them except a shared desire to fix the broken company he had helped destroy for years. She took the evidence to Dominic's office, and the king did not hesitate for a single second. He called human resources and ordered Victor's immediate termination. The swift removal sent a massive shockwave through the entire 14th floor, causing 2 other traditional executives to resign in protest by the end of the day. The corporate office was in a total panic, but Dominic refused to back down, telling the remaining leadership that anyone who sabotaged the cultural reform would be removed regardless of their tenure. He asked Hannah to fill the vacant management positions by promoting qualified employees from the restaurant level, including Leo and a former server named Maria Lopez. Michael Tang, the VP of Operations, argued that putting hourly workers into executive roles was corporate suicide, but Hannah pointed out that they possessed real operational experience. By the time April arrived, the weather began to warm up, and the company-wide data proved that Hannah's model was actually working. Internal employee turnover dropped from 40% to 28%, and the syndicate's stock price stabilized before climbing higher on the public market. In the middle of April, Dominic received an emergency phone call from Lily's elementary school, stating that his daughter had fallen from the playground equipment and fractured her left wrist. He dropped his folder, left his laptop open on his desk, and sprinted out of the building like a regular human father, running to protect his child. He texted Hannah from the hospital, stating that Lily was going to be fine, but was incredibly scared, and that he would be staying home with her for the next few days. Dominic remained away from the corporate tower for 3 consecutive days, dedicating all his time to taking care of his injured daughter, while Hannah managed the executive floor. The company did not collapse in his absence, proving to the remaining leadership that the syndicate could function perfectly well without a cold machine running it every hour. When Dominic returned on Thursday morning, he looked exhausted from watching children's movies but carried a lighter expression than Hannah had ever seen on his pale face. He admitted that Lily had made him watch the same animated film 4 times in a single day, but he smiled genuinely as he recounted the story. Hannah realized that the strict conditions she had placed on his employment had completely changed his life, transforming him from a feared tyrant back into a real father. Later that afternoon, Catherine Yates, the influential board member who had previously remained undecided, called Hannah's office phone to request a private meeting. She asked Hannah to meet her off the record at a quiet coffee shop on 5th Street the following morning, at 7 o'clock sharp. Hannah arrived at the expensive coffee shop early, finding Catherine Yates already sitting by the window, wearing an elegant wool coat and sipping a cup of black coffee. Catherine pushed a sweet latte across the table, noting that Rebecca had mentioned Hannah preferred her drinks with a massive amount of sugar. She explained that she had been on the syndicate's board for 6 years, watching the leadership prioritize short-term shareholder value over human decency, until the culture became completely toxic. Catherine stated that Robert was currently working behind the scenes to gather enough votes to force Dominic's resignation at the upcoming 6-month review meeting. She admitted she was still undecided about how to cast her vote, and wanted to hear the real reason a human waitress had taken on a corporate empire. Hannah looked Catherine in the eyes and explained that she spent 12 years feeling completely invisible and disposable, working long hours for managers who viewed her as a number. She stated that when Dominic offered her the position, she saw a rare chance to matter and to protect other workers from experiencing that same empty feeling. She argued that the traditional qualified executives were the ones who created the high turnover rates, and that treating people with basic respect was simply good business. Catherine listened in silence, a small smile touching her face, before she stood up to leave the coffee shop, stating that she would not vote with Robert. She told Hannah that it was finally time for the board to try something different, even if the strategy came from a waitress with a laptop. The final 6-month review meeting took place on a cold Thursday morning, in the grand boardroom on the 16th floor, the atmosphere thick with tension, as the directors took their seats. Robert spent the first 40 minutes delivering a smooth presentation about the temporary stock dip and the operational disruption caused by Victor's sudden termination. He claimed that Dominic was gambling the company's financial stability on an untested human experiment that defied traditional vampire corporate strategy. When it was his turn, Dominic stood up and presented the actual financial data from the 4 test locations, showing a massive increase in revenue and customer satisfaction. He stated that profit without sustainability was simply a slow-motion failure, and that the company could no longer function through the mechanism of fear. Hannah stood up next, presenting recorded testimonials from 50 different hourly employees, who spoke about how their lives had improved under the new management guidelines. She told the board members that the data proved human well-being and shareholder value were deeply connected, and that running a business did not require treating workers poorly. Robert tried to interrupt her, but Catherine spoke up firmly, stating that the board had been operating on sanitized data for years and needed to hear the truth. Catherine called for an immediate vote on a new motion to grant Dominic full permanent authority to roll out the cultural reform program across all 73 corporate locations. 7 hands went up around the table in unanimous support, prompting Robert to slam his folder shut and resign from the board in pure anger. 3 months after the historic board meeting, the Frost Syndicate's official annual report revealed record-breaking profits alongside the highest employee retention rate in the history of the company. Major business publications ran front-page features about the incredible cultural transformation, and other multi-billion-dollar corporations began reaching out to request consulting advice. Hannah hired a dedicated team to manage the expanding workload, formally promoting Rebecca to Chief People Officer and giving Leo total oversight of the entire Northern California restaurant division. She spent her days traveling between various locations, ensuring that the anonymous complaint systems were operating correctly, and that managers were leading with empathy rather than intimidation. She no longer felt out of place walking through the glass doors of the corporate tower, knowing she earned her position through hard work and honesty. On a warm Tuesday afternoon in September, nearly 1 year after their very first interaction, Hannah received a text message from Leo telling her to come down to the downtown restaurant. When she walked through the front doors at 1 o'clock, she found table 17 beautifully set for 2 people, with Dominic Frost sitting by the window reading a report. He gestured for her to sit down in the chair across from him, sliding a formal white envelope across the clean tablecloth with a calm expression on his pale face. Hannah opened the envelope and found an official contract offering her a promotion to the position of Chief Cultural Officer, complete with an executive compensation package. Dominic told her that she had proven herself every single day for the past year, transforming an entire industry's perspective on how to treat human workers. Hannah smiled, accepted the contract without any hesitation or self-doubt, and spent the rest of the afternoon discussing their long-term expansion plans over lunch. Dominic mentioned that Lily was currently preparing a project for her upcoming school science fair about dinosaur bone density and had specifically requested that Hannah attend as a guest. He laughed, warning her that his 7-year-old daughter had become incredibly opinionated about scientific methodology and would likely force Hannah to judge the other children's projects. Hannah promised she would be there, feeling a warm sense of happiness as she looked around the bustling dining room at the smiling servers and happy customers. She realized that the restaurant had transformed from a place of constant fear into a community built on mutual respect and simple human decency. As the afternoon sun began to dip below the San Francisco skyline, casting long golden shadows across table 17, Hannah looked out at the busy streets below and let herself feel truly content. She thought about the long journey from being a broke, exhausted waitress with $43 in her bank account to becoming an influential executive, leading a corporate cultural revolution. She realized that her personal worth had never been conditional on being perfect, or working herself to the point of complete physical exhaustion. The true lesson she carried forward was that dignity was something you claimed for yourself, by showing up honestly, and refusing to shrink your voice to fit the narrow expectations of others. The future would bring new challenges, new resistance, and unexpected setbacks across the 73 locations. But she was no longer terrified of the unknown. She knew that as long as she stayed true to her perspective and maintained her integrity, she possessed the strength to handle whatever came next, standing tall in the world she helped create.